The ballroom glittered with champagne and lies. Ethan Cole stood frozen as the words echoed through the crowd. Did you really think she married you for love? His billionaire wife's secret, the real reason she'd chosen a broke single father, hung in the air like shattered glass. Every eye turned toward him. Every whisper cut deeper. He'd sold his pride to save his daughter, but he never imagined the price would be his heart. This is the story of a man who thought he was playing a role, until the woman behind the fortune made him forget it was all supposed to be fake. Before we begin, if you're watching from New York, Tokyo, London, or anywhere in between, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, and if you stay until the end, you'll discover whether love can survive when it's built on a lie. Hit that like button, and let's dive in. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Ethan Cole sat with his head in his hands, his daughter Lily asleep against his shoulder, her small fingers clutching the sleeve of his worn jacket. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow that made 3 a.m. feel like the end of the world. His phone buzzed. Another text from the billing department, another number he couldn't pay. Another reminder that no matter how hard he worked, no matter how many double shifts he pulled at the construction site, it would never be enough. His mother was 3 floors above him, hooked to machines that beeped with mechanical indifference. The doctor said she'd collapsed without warning, a brain aneurysm they'd caught just in time. But just in time came with a price tag that might as well have been written in a foreign language. $240,000 for the surgery, another $100,000 for recovery and rehabilitation. Ethan had $1,700 in his checking account. Daddy? Lily stirred, her 6-year-old voice thick with sleep. Is Grandma going to be okay? He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her dark hair. Yeah, baby, Grandma's tough. She's going to be fine. The lie tasted bitter, but what else could he say? That he was drowning, that every door he'd knocked on had slammed shut, that he'd already sold everything worth selling, begged every friend for loans they couldn't afford to give, and still fallen impossibly short? His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't the hospital. It was Richard Cole, his stepfather. Ethan stared at the name on the screen. They hadn't spoken in 8 months, not since Ethan had told the old man exactly what he thought of his new wife, his new life, and his convenient amnesia about the family he'd left behind. Richard had walked out on Ethan's mother 20 years ago, remarried into money, and spent 2 decades pretending his first family didn't exist. But desperate men don't have the luxury of pride. Ethan answered, What do you want, Richard? I heard about your mother. The voice on the other end was smooth, controlled, everything Ethan remembered and hated. The aneurysm, the bills. I'm sorry, Ethan. Are you calling to help or to gloat? To offer you a solution. Ethan's jaw tightened. I don't want your money. Good, because I'm not offering money. There was a pause, the kind that made Ethan's stomach twist. I'm offering you a way out, but it comes with conditions. I'm not interested in $250,000, Richard interrupted. All medical expenses covered, your mother gets the best care available. You walk away with a clean slate and enough left over to give that little girl of yours a real future. Ethan's throat went dry. What's the catch? You get married. For a moment, Ethan thought he'd misheard. What? There's a woman, Vivian Ashford. She needs a husband for 6 months. You need money. It's a simple transaction. You're insane. I'm practical, Richard said coolly. Vivian comes from one of the wealthiest families in the country. She has her reasons for needing this arrangement, and frankly, they're none of your concern. What you need to know is this: 6 months of playing the devoted husband, and every debt you have disappears. Your mother gets the surgery, Lily gets stability, you get to stop drowning. Ethan stood, carefully shifting Lily to the chair beside him. He walked to the window overlooking the parking lot, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. Why me? Because you're desperate enough to say yes, and respectable enough not to embarrass her. You're a widower, a father, a working man with no scandals. You're perfect. I'm not doing this. Then enjoy watching your mother die because you were too proud to accept help. Richard's voice didn't change, but the words landed like a fist. I'll give you 24 hours to decide. After that, the offer expires. The line went dead. Ethan stood there, phone pressed to his ear, staring at nothing. Behind him, Lily mumbled something in her sleep. Somewhere above, machines were keeping his mother alive. And somewhere in an office he'd never seen, accountants were calculating exactly how long they'd let her stay that way before the money ran out. He thought of Sarah, his late wife, and what she would have said. She'd have told him to fight, to find another way, to never compromise who he was for anyone, no matter the cost. But Sarah had been gone for 3 years, and she'd never had to choose between pride and survival. 23 hours later, Ethan stood outside a glass tower in downtown that seemed to scrape the sky itself. The building was all sharp angles and reflective surfaces, the kind of place where people wore suits that cost more than his truck. He'd left Lily with his neighbor, showered for the first time in 2 days, and put on the only decent shirt he owned. His hands were shaking. The lobby was marble and chrome, filled with people who moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having to check a price tag. Ethan felt like an imposter the moment he walked through the revolving doors. "Mr. Cole?" A woman in a tailored black suit appeared at his elbow. "Ms. Ashford is expecting you. Please follow me." They rode an elevator to the 42nd floor in silence. The woman's heels clicked against polished floors as she led him through a maze of glass-walled offices and conference rooms. Finally, she stopped at a set of double doors. "Wait here, please." She disappeared inside. Ethan stood in the hallway, his heart pounding against his ribs. What the hell was he doing? He was about to agree to marry a complete stranger, some rich woman who needed a prop for whatever game wealthy people played. This was insane. The doors opened, and Ethan forgot how to breathe. The woman who emerged wasn't what he'd expected. He'd pictured someone cold, severe, dripping with diamonds and disdain. Instead, Vivian Ashford was 30, maybe 31, with dark hair pulled back in a simple twist and eyes that were unsettlingly direct. She wore a cream-colored dress that was elegant without being showy, and when she looked at him, there was something in her expression he couldn't quite name. Not pity, not calculation, something gentler, something that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Mr. Cole," she said, extending her hand. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, warm despite the formal words. "Thank you for coming." He shook her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin cool. "Ms. Ashford." "Please, call me Vivian." She gestured to the office behind her. "Shall we?" The office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire city. Ethan felt dizzy just looking at it. Vivian closed the doors behind them and gestured to a leather chair. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine." He wasn't, but accepting refreshments felt like accepting too much. Vivian sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "I assume Richard explained the arrangement. He said you need a husband for 6 months. He didn't say why." "Does it matter?" "Yeah," Ethan said flatly. "It does." She studied him, those dark eyes unreadable. "My family has expectations. I'm 30 years old, unmarried, and next in line to inherit a significant portion of our company. Certain members of the board have raised concerns about my stability. They believe a woman in my position should have a family, a settled life. It's archaic and insulting, but it's reality. So you need a prop." "I need a partner," she corrected gently. "Someone who can attend events, smile for cameras, and convince people that I'm not the cold, unfeeling businesswoman they've decided I am." "And after 6 months?" "An amicable divorce. You'll be compensated generously for your time and discretion." Ethan leaned back, the leather creaking beneath him. "Richard said you'd cover my mother's medical bills." "All of them," Vivian confirmed. "And provide a trust fund for your daughter's education. You'll also receive a monthly stipend during our marriage and a settlement at the end." "How much?" $500,000. The number hung in the air like something physical. Ethan's mind raced, calculating what that money would mean. Lily's college, a house without mortgage worries, a future where he didn't have to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. "What's the catch?" he asked. "The catch is that it has to look real," Vivian said. "We'll live together, attend family functions, present a united front in public. My relatives are not easy to fool, Mr. Cole. If they suspect this is a business arrangement, the whole thing falls apart. So I have to lie to everyone. You have to play a role. There's a difference." "Is there?" Ethan met her eyes. "What happens if I screw up? If someone figures it out?" "Then we both lose." Vivian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her gaze. "I need this to work, Mr. Cole. My entire future depends on it. If you agree, I will do everything in my power to make this as painless as possible for you and your daughter, but I need your commitment, all of it. Ethan thought of his mother in that hospital bed. He thought of Lily asking when things would go back to normal. He thought of the stack of bills on his kitchen counter and the notices from the bank. 6 months, he said slowly, and then I'm free. 6 months, Vivian confirmed, with the option to extend if needed, but only by mutual agreement. I want it in writing, every detail, every dollar. Of course. She reached into her desk and pulled out a leather folder. My lawyers prepared this yesterday. Take it home. Read it. Have your own lawyer review it if you'd like. I can recommend someone if you don't have one. Ethan took the folder. It was heavy, expensive, like everything else in this office. When do you need an answer? As soon as possible, but take the time you need. This is not a decision to make lightly. He stood. Vivian rose with him. They stood there for a moment, this stranger who was asking him to rewrite his entire life, and Ethan felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. Why me? Richard said I was perfect, but there have to be 1,000 guys who jump at this. Why pick someone you've never met? Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, because you have something most people in my world don't. What's that? Something real to lose. She walked him to the door, her expression unreadable. The men my family would approve of are all like Richard, people who see relationships as transactions, who wouldn't hesitate to exploit this situation for their own gain. You're different. You're doing this for your family, not yourself. That matters to me. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded, tucked the folder under his arm, and left. He read the contract that night after Lily fell asleep. Every page, every clause, every legal term he had to look up on his phone. It was all there, exactly as Vivian had promised. Medical bills paid in full. Monthly stipend of $10,000. Educational trust for Lily, $200,000. Final settlement of $500,000 at the end of 6 months. There were rules, too. They would live in Vivian's home. Public displays of affection were expected. Infidelity was grounds for immediate termination of the agreement with no payout. All communications regarding the arrangement must remain confidential. At the bottom of the last page, there were 2 signature lines. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, pen in hand, staring at those blank spaces. Outside, the city hummed with life he was no longer part of. People going to jobs that paid enough, living in homes they could afford, making choices that didn't feel like choosing which limb to cut off. His phone rang. The hospital. He answered. Mr. Cole, this is Dr. Martinez. I wanted to update you on your mother's condition. We need to proceed with surgery within the next 48 hours or risk permanent brain damage. I know the financial situation is complicated, but do it, Ethan said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, distant and certain. Schedule the surgery. The bills will be taken care of. There was a pause. Mr. Cole, I need to be clear about the costs. I understand. Just save her. He hung up before the doctor could ask questions he didn't want to answer. Then he picked up the pen, and with a hand that barely shook at all, he signed his name on both lines. By morning, he was engaged to a woman he'd met once. By afternoon, his mother was in surgery. By evening, movers were packing up his apartment. The deal was done. The trap was set. And Ethan Cole had just walked into it with his eyes wide open. Vivian's estate wasn't a house. It was a monument. Ethan stood in the circular driveway, Lily's hand in his, staring up at the sprawling mansion that would be their home for the next 6 months. It was all white stone and tall windows, surrounded by gardens that looked like they'd been imported from some European palace. Fountains, sculptures, perfectly manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than Ethan's yearly salary. Daddy, Lily whispered, squeezing his hand. Is this where the princess lives? Before he could answer, the front doors opened and Vivian appeared at the top of the stone steps. She'd changed from the business attire he'd seen her in before. Now she wore dark jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger this way, almost approachable. Welcome, she said, descending the steps. When she reached them, she crouched down to Lily's level. You must be Lily. I'm Vivian. I've heard so much about you. Lily hid behind Ethan's leg. Vivian didn't push, she just smiled, a real smile, not the polite mask Ethan had seen in her office, and stood. I know this is overwhelming, she said to Ethan, but I promise, we'll take it slow. Come on, I'll show you around. The interior was even more stunning than the exterior. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, artwork that probably belonged in museums. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor. Everything gleamed. Ethan felt like he was standing in a hotel. "Your rooms are this way," Vivian said, leading them up the stairs. "I've had them prepared, but if there's anything you need changed, just let me know." She opened a door to reveal a bedroom suite that was easily twice the size of Ethan's entire apartment. A king bed dominated the space, dressed in white linens that looked impossibly soft. There was a sitting area with a fireplace, a walk-in closet already filled with clothes in his size, and a bathroom done in marble and gold fixtures. "This is mine?" Ethan asked. "Ours," Vivian corrected. "Technically, for appearances. But don't worry, there's a guest suite connected through that door." She pointed to an adjoining door he hadn't noticed. "You'll have complete privacy." "And me?" Lily asked, her voice small. Vivian's expression softened. "Come see." She led them down the hall to another room, and when she opened the door, Lily gasped. It was a little girl's dream, a canopy bed with gauzy white curtains, walls painted a soft lavender, shelves full of books and toys. There was even a window seat overlooking the gardens. "Is this really for me?" Lily breathed. "All yours," Vivian said, "though I may have gone a little overboard with the stuffed animals. I wasn't sure what you liked." Lily ran into the room, immediately claiming the window seat. Ethan watched his daughter's face light up in a way he hadn't seen since before Sarah died, and something in his chest twisted painfully. "Thank you," he said quietly to Vivian. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did." Vivian leaned against the doorframe, watching Lily explore. "She's part of this too. I want her to feel at home here." "This isn't home." "No," Vivian agreed, "but it could be comfortable, for 6 months at least." They stood in silence for a moment, watching Lily arrange stuffed animals on her new bed with the kind of serious concentration only 6-year-olds could manage. "My family is coming for dinner tomorrow night," Vivian said. "It's time for you to meet them." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Already?" "The sooner we establish the relationship, the better. They're intense, but they mean well." She glanced at him, and for the first time he saw something like nervousness in her eyes. "Just follow my lead. Answer their questions honestly. About your work, your daughter, your late wife. They'll respect authenticity more than anything else." "What do I call you in front of them?" "What do you want to call me?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know. What do married people call each other?" A small smile tugged at her lips. "Usually their names." "Vivian, then. And I'll call you Ethan." She pushed off the doorframe. "I'll let you both settle in. If you need anything, there's a phone in your room that connects directly to the house staff. Dinner is at 7, casual." She started to leave, then paused. "Ethan?" "Yeah?" "I know this is strange. I know I'm asking a lot. But I promise, I'll do everything I can to make this work for you and Lily." Her eyes held his, and for a moment he saw past the billionaire, past the arrangement, to something raw underneath. "I'm not a monster. Whatever Richard told you about me, whatever you're imagining, I'm just trying to survive too." Then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Ethan stood in the doorway of his daughter's new room, watching her play in a space that cost more than everything he'd ever owned combined, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten them into. Bessie. Dinner with Vivian's family was exactly as terrifying as Ethan had anticipated. They arrived in waves. Her mother, Eleanor Ashford, a woman who wore pearls like armor and had eyes that seemed to see through skin. Her younger brother, Marcus, who shook Ethan's hand with the kind of grip that was testing for weakness. An aunt, 2 cousins, and Vivian's Uncle Charles, who apparently sat on the board of the family company and asked questions like a prosecutor. They gathered in a dining room that seated 20, at a table set with china so delicate Ethan was afraid to touch it. "So," Eleanor said, her gaze fixed on Ethan with surgical precision, "Vivian tells us you work in construction." "Yes, ma'am, site foreman." "How quaint." It wasn't quite an insult, but it wasn't a compliment either. "And your late wife, Sarah, was it? How did you meet?" Ethan felt Vivian stiffen beside him. They'd prepared for this, rehearsed the story until it felt natural. But sitting here, with all these eyes on him, the words stuck in his throat. "College," he said. "We were both working part-time at the same coffee shop. She spilled espresso all over my textbook and I asked her out to make up for it." "How romantic." Vivian's aunt murmured, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. And when did she pass? Charles asked. 3 years ago. Cancer. The table went quiet. Even Eleanor's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry for your loss, Marcus said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. That must have been difficult raising Lily alone. It was, Ethan admitted. It is. But she's worth it. Clearly. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Vivian. And how did you two meet? You've been rather vague about the details, darling. Vivian reached under the table and found Ethan's hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. Through Richard Cole, she said smoothly, Ethan's stepfather. We met at a charity function, started talking, and... She glanced at Ethan, and the look she gave him was so convincing that for a moment even he almost believed it. I couldn't stop thinking about him. A whirlwind romance, Charles said dryly. How very unlike you, Vivian. Maybe I was tired of being predictable. Or maybe you're making a strategic move, Charles countered. Funny how this engagement happens right before the board vote on the succession plan. Charles, Eleanor said sharply, not at dinner. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Charles leaned back in his chair, studying them both. Vivian needs to secure her position. A husband and a ready-made family make her look stable, committed. It's good optics. Is that what you think this is? Ethan said, the words coming out harder than he'd intended. Optics? The table went silent again, but this time it was different. Everyone was watching him now. I think, Charles said slowly, that my niece is a brilliant businesswoman who understands how to play the game. The question is, do you? Ethan felt Vivian's hand tighten on his, a silent plea to let it go. But 3 years of watching his wife die, of working himself to exhaustion, of swallowing his pride just to survive, had left him with very little patience for rich men who thought they could see through him. I don't care about your board vote, Ethan said. I don't care about succession plans or family empires. I care about my daughter, and I care about the woman sitting next to me. If you want to believe that's an act, fine. But don't expect me to smile and nod while you insult her at her own table. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Eleanor did something unexpected. She smiled, a real smile, not the polite mask she'd been wearing all evening. Well, she said, picking up her wine glass. That was refreshing. Welcome to the family, Ethan. The tension broke. Marcus laughed. Even Charles looked grudgingly impressed. Vivian's hand relaxed in his, and when he glanced at her, he saw something in her expression that made his chest tight. Relief. And maybe, just maybe, gratitude. The rest of dinner passed more easily. They asked about Lily, about his work, about his plans for the wedding. Vivian fielded most of the questions with practiced ease, but every so often she'd turn to him, including him in decisions about flowers and venues and things he'd never thought about in his life. By the time dessert was served, Ethan almost felt like he could breathe. Almost. That night, after everyone had left and Lily was asleep, Ethan found himself alone in the massive bedroom suite. He stood at the window, looking out over the gardens bathed in moonlight, trying to process everything that had happened. There was a soft knock at the connecting door. Come in, he called. Vivian entered, still in the dress she'd worn to dinner. She looked exhausted. You did well tonight, she said. Better than well. You were perfect. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was trying not to let your uncle treat you like a chess piece. He does that to everyone. It's his way of maintaining control. She crossed to the window, standing beside him, but not too close. I'm sorry I put you in that position. It's fine. It's not. She turned to look at him, and in the dim light her face was all shadows and angles. This whole thing, it's not fair to you, I know that. But thank you for defending me. You didn't have to. Yeah, I did. Ethan met her eyes. We're supposed to be married. That means something, even if it's fake. Is it? The question was quiet, almost hesitant. Fake, I mean. I know the situation is unconventional, but the things you said tonight about caring about me, did you mean any of that? Ethan didn't answer right away. He thought about the woman he'd met in that office, all business and composure. And then he thought about the woman who'd filled Lily's room with toys, who'd held his hand under the table, who'd looked at him like he was more than just a means to an end. I don't know, he said honestly. I don't know what this is yet, but I meant what I said. If we're going to do this, I'm all in. For the next 6 months, you're my wife, and I don't half-ass anything. Vivian smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Neither do I. She reached out, adjusting his collar in a gesture that was surprisingly intimate. Her fingers brushed against his neck, and Ethan felt something electric run through him. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we have our first public appearance together, a gallery opening. The press will be there." "So the performance begins." "So the performance begins," she agreed. But the way she was looking at him didn't feel like a performance. It felt like something else entirely. She left him there, returning to her own room through the connecting door. Ethan stood at the window long after she'd gone, his heart beating too fast, his mind racing with questions he didn't want to examine too closely. He'd agreed to 6 months of playing a role. He hadn't agreed to start believing it. But as he climbed into the enormous bed and stared up at the ceiling, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the line between performance and reality was already starting to blur. And he had no idea what that meant. For him, for Vivian, or for the carefully constructed lie they were building together. Outside, the city lights glittered like stars, and somewhere in the darkness, the clock was already counting down the days until this beautiful, impossible illusion would come crashing down. The only question was whether either of them would survive it intact. The gallery was all white walls and pretension, filled with people who spoke in hushed tones about brushstrokes and artistic vision, while sipping champagne that probably cost more per glass than Ethan used to spend on groceries for a week. He stood beside Vivian in a suit that had been tailored specifically for him, another expense he hadn't asked for, but had appeared in his closet that morning, alongside shirts with French cuffs and shoes made from leather so soft it felt like sin. Vivian's hand rested lightly in the crook of his arm, her touch barely there but impossible to ignore. She wore midnight blue silk that made her look like she'd been poured into the dress, and every eye in the room kept drifting back to them. The newly engaged couple, the billionaire heiress and her unexpected choice. "Smile," Vivian murmured without moving her lips. "You look like you're at a funeral." "I feel like I'm at a funeral. My own." Her fingers tightened on his arm, and he caught the flash of amusement in her eyes. "They're watching to see if you'll crack. Don't give them the satisfaction." "Who's watching?" "Everyone." She guided him toward a painting that looked like someone had thrown paint at a canvas and called it art. "See the woman in red by the sculpture? That's Diane Rothschild. She runs the society page for 3 major publications. And the man talking to the gallery owner? Thomas Chen. He sits on the board with my Uncle Charles." Ethan forced himself to relax, to let his expression soften into something that might pass for comfort. "So this is a test." "Everything is a test." Vivian turned to face him, and the movement brought them closer together. Her perfume was subtle, something floral that made him think of gardens after rain. "But you're doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Half the women in this room are jealous, and the other half are trying to figure out what I saw in you." "What did you see in me?" The question slipped out before he could stop it, too honest for the performance they were supposed to be giving. But Vivian didn't flinch. She reached up, straightening his tie in a gesture that looked affectionate to anyone watching. "I saw someone real," she said quietly. "In a world full of people playing parts, you were the only one who wasn't pretending to be something he's not. That's ironic considering what we're doing right now." "Is it?" Her hand lingered on his chest, right over his heart. "You're still you, Ethan. The suit doesn't change that." Before he could respond, a camera flash went off nearby. Then another. Suddenly there were photographers materializing from the crowd, calling Vivian's name, asking them to pose together. Vivian's transformation was instantaneous. Her smile became radiant, her posture perfect. She turned into them, pulling Ethan closer with practiced ease. "Mr. Cole, how does it feel to be marrying into the Ashford family?" "Look this way, Vivian. Show us the ring." "When's the wedding?" "How did you propose, Mr. Cole?" Ethan felt his throat close. They hadn't discussed this part. He didn't know what story they were supposed to tell, what version of events would sell the illusion. But Vivian's hand found his, her fingers threading through his in a way that felt natural despite the audience. "He didn't," she said, her voice carrying just enough warmth to sound genuine. "I did." The photographers loved that. More flashes, more questions. Ethan felt like he was drowning in light. "I couldn't wait anymore," Vivian continued, and she was looking at him now instead of the cameras. "I knew what I wanted, and I've never been good at patience, so I asked. and thankfully he said yes. It was a good story, a great story, actually. The powerful woman who knew her own mind, the everyday man who'd captured her heart. The photographers ate it up, firing questions about the proposal, the ring, their plans. Ethan let Vivian handle most of it, adding small details when she glanced at him for confirmation. By the time they finally escaped back into the gallery crowd, his jaw hurt from forcing a smile. "You're a natural at this," he said once they were alone again. "I've had practice." Vivian accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter, though she didn't drink from it. "My mother started training me for public appearances when I was 6. Smile, but not too much. Stand straight, but not stiff. Never let them see you sweat." Sounds exhausting. It is. She glanced at him, and for a moment the mask slipped. "But it's the price of admission to this world. You'll learn." "I'm not sure I want to." "You don't have a choice. Not for the next 6 months, anyway." She steered him toward a quieter corner away from the main crowd. "There's something I need to tell you before you hear it from someone else. The wedding. My mother has already started making plans." Ethan's stomach dropped. "We never talked about an actual wedding. The contract said public displays of commitment. A wedding is the ultimate public display." Vivian's expression was apologetic but firm. "It doesn't have to be large, a small ceremony, immediate family only. But it needs to happen, and soon. The longer we wait, the more people will question whether this is real." "This isn't real. I know that, you know that. But everyone else needs to believe it is." She set down her untouched champagne. "I'm sorry. I should have been clear about this from the beginning, but we're past the point of backing out now. The engagement announcement hit the news this morning. My family is invested. The board is watching. If we don't follow through, it'll look like I can't commit to anything. Not to a relationship, not to the company, not to the future they're trusting me to lead." Ethan wanted to argue, to tell her this was too much, too far beyond what he'd agreed to. But he thought of his mother, recovering in a hospital room with care he could never have afforded on his own. He thought of Lily, happy for the first time in months, sleeping in a room that felt like something out of a fairy tale. He thought of the check that had cleared in his account that morning, with more zeros than he'd ever seen in his life. "When?" he asked. 3 weeks. "Jesus, Vivian. I know it's fast, but fast doesn't give people time to dig too deep, to ask too many questions. We get married, we let the press take their photos, and then we can breathe." She looked up at him, and her eyes were pleading. "I'm asking you to trust me. I know I don't deserve it. I know this whole situation is insane, but please, trust me just a little longer." He should have said no. He should have walked away, contract be damned. But there was something in her expression that stopped him, something vulnerable beneath the polished exterior. 3 weeks, he said. "And then what? We just live like we're married? We continue what we're already doing. Appearances at events, family dinners, maintaining the illusion." She hesitated, then added, "You'll have your own space, your own life. I'm not asking you to give up who you are, just asking me to pretend to be someone else in public." Yes. At least she was honest. Ethan could respect that, even if he hated everything else about this situation. A familiar voice cut through his thoughts. Well, well, the happy couple. Ethan turned to find Marcus Ashford approaching with a woman on his arm, tall, blonde, with the kind of beauty that came from expensive maintenance and good genes. "Marcus," Vivian said, her public smile sliding back into place. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." "Wouldn't miss it. Besides, Catherine wanted to meet your mysterious fiancé." Marcus gestured to the woman beside him. "Catherine Wainwright, meet Ethan Cole." "Ethan, Catherine is an old friend of the family." The way Marcus said old friend suggested there was history there, and from the way Catherine was looking at Vivian, with barely concealed disdain, Ethan guessed it wasn't friendly history. "Charmed," Catherine said, extending her hand to Ethan. Her grip was limp, dismissive. "I was so surprised to hear about the engagement. Vivian's usually so particular about her choices." "Is she?" Ethan said evenly. "Oh, yes. I mean, we all expected her to marry someone from her own world, you know? Someone who understood the pressures of this life. But I suppose love makes us all do unexpected things." Catherine's smile was poison wrapped in politeness. "How long did you say you two have been together?" "Long enough," Vivian said, and there was steel in her voice now. "And you work in construction? How fascinating." Catherine made it sound like she'd said garbage collection. That must be so different from what Vivian's used to. Do you worry about fitting in? About whether you can keep up with her lifestyle? Ethan felt Vivian stiffen beside him. He could feel the trap closing, could see exactly what Catherine was doing, trying to highlight the gap between them, to make him feel small and out of place. 6 months ago, it would have worked. Hell, even 6 days ago, it would have worked. But standing here in a suit that cost more than his old truck, with Vivian's hand in his, and the memory of how she'd defended him to her own uncle, Ethan found he didn't care what this woman thought. I don't worry about keeping up, he said calmly. I worry about keeping her grounded. Someone's got to remind her what real life looks like outside of gallery openings and board meetings. Catherine's smile faltered. Marcus laughed outright. I like him, Marcus said to Vivian. He's got spine. That's good. You need someone who won't just roll over and agree with everything you say. I'm well aware, Vivian said dryly. She turned to Catherine. If you'll excuse us, there's someone I need to introduce Ethan to. She guided him away before Catherine could respond. Once they were out of earshot, she let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like relief. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not letting her bait you into saying something we'd both regret. Catherine thrives on drama. The more uncomfortable she can make people, the happier she is. Why is she here? Because Marcus invited her, and because she used to date my brother before she decided he wasn't ambitious enough and set her sights on a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. She's been trying to worm her way back into the family's good graces ever since. Ethan glanced back at Catherine, who was now talking animatedly with a group of women who all looked like they'd been cut from the same expensive cloth. She seems pleasant, Vivian laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and warm. You're terrible at sarcasm. I'm working on it. They spent the next hour navigating the gallery, making small talk with people whose names Ethan immediately forgot, posing for more photos, playing the perfect couple. By the time they finally made it back to the car, Ethan's face hurt from smiling and his head pounded from the effort of remembering which fork to use and which glass was his. The driver opened the door for them, and they slid into the back of the town car in silence. As they pulled away from the curb, Vivian kicked off her heels with a sigh that was pure exhaustion. That was brutal, she said, leaning her head back against the seat. That was your idea of a first date? That was survival. There's a difference. She turned to look at him, her face half in shadow from the passing streetlights. You did well. Really well. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you handled yourself perfectly. I felt like a circus animal. Welcome to my world. She closed her eyes. 3 more weeks of this intensity, and then it'll settle down. Once we're married, once the novelty wears off, the press will lose interest. We can go back to living relatively normal lives. Normal, Ethan repeated. Right. Because there's nothing weird about a fake marriage to a billionaire. It's only fake if we let it be. Vivian opened her eyes, and there was something in her expression he couldn't quite read. I meant what I said earlier, about you being real. I don't want you to change who you are for this, Ethan. I need you to stay exactly as you are. That's what makes this work. He wanted to ask what she meant by that, wanted to understand why it seemed to matter so much to her. But before he could find the words, his phone buzzed. A text from the neighbor watching Lily. She's asking for you. Everything okay, but I think she's getting homesick. Vivian must have seen something change in his expression. What's wrong? Lily, she wants to come home. Then let's get her. Vivian leaned forward, tapping on the divider between them and the driver. Change of plans. We need to pick up Mr. Cole's daughter. 20 minutes later, they were pulling up outside Ethan's old apartment building. It looked smaller than he remembered, shabbier in the glow of the streetlights. The neighbor met them at the door with Lily already in her pajamas, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Daddy! Lily ran to him, and Ethan scooped her up, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck. Hey, baby, you okay? I missed you. She buried her face in his shoulder. The house is too big. I couldn't find you. I'm sorry. I should have been there when you woke up. He looked at the neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd watched Lily more times than he could count. Thank you for calling. Of course. Mrs. Chen's gaze drifted to Vivian, who stood back slightly, giving them space. This must be your fiancé. I saw the announcement on the news. Vivian, this is Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen, Vivian Ashford. Vivian stepped forward, offering her hand. Thank you for taking care of Lily. I know change is hard, especially for little ones. You're welcome, dear. Mrs. Chen studied her with the kind of frank assessment only elderly women could get away with. She's a sweet girl. Takes after her father. You take good care of them both, you hear? I intend to, Vivian said, and she sounded like she meant it. They drove back to the estate with Lily curled between them, half asleep against Ethan's side. Vivian was quiet, gazing out the window, and Ethan found himself studying her profile. The elegant line of her jaw, the way the city lights played across her face, the small furrow between her brows that suggested she was thinking about something that troubled her. What? She asked, without looking at him. Nothing. You're staring. I'm trying to figure you out. Now she did turn, her expression curious. Any luck? Not even a little bit. He shifted carefully, trying not to wake Lily. One minute you're this controlled businesswoman who has an answer for everything. The next you're kicking off your shoes and complaining about the circus. I can't tell which version is real. Maybe they both are. Vivian reached over, gently brushing a strand of hair from Lily's sleeping face. The gesture was so tender it caught Ethan off guard. We all wear masks, Ethan. The question is whether we wear them to hide who we are, or to protect what we can't afford to lose. Which one are you doing? She didn't answer. The car pulled into the estate's driveway, and the moment was broken. Ethan carried Lily up to her room while Vivian followed behind, turning on lights, pulling back the covers on the canopy bed. Thank you, Ethan said as he tucked Lily in, for going with me to get her. She's part of this too. I told you, I want her to feel safe here. Vivian hesitated in the doorway. Ethan, about the wedding, if it's too much, if you need more time, 3 weeks is fine. He said it before he could second-guess himself. You're right. The faster we do this, the less time people have to dig. We'll make it work. Something shifted in Vivian's expression, relief maybe, or something deeper. Get some rest. Tomorrow we're meeting with the wedding planner. Of course we are, Ethan muttered, but there was no heat in it. After Vivian left, he stood in Lily's doorway, watching his daughter sleep in a bed that probably cost more than every piece of furniture he'd ever owned combined. The room still smelled like new paint and expensive fabric, nothing like the cramped bedroom in their old apartment that had smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs and had a water stain on the ceiling shaped like a cloud. What am I doing, baby girl? He whispered. What the hell am I doing? But Lily didn't answer. She just slept, peaceful and safe, in a world where her biggest worry was which stuffed animal to cuddle with. And maybe, Ethan thought, that was enough. Maybe that was the whole point. The next 2 weeks became a blur of preparations that Ethan had no control over. There were fittings for a tuxedo he'd wear exactly once, meetings with florists about arrangements he couldn't tell apart, tastings of cakes that all tasted the same to him but apparently had subtle differences in mouthfeel and flavor profiles. Vivian's mother took over most of the planning with the kind of military precision that suggested she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life, and Ethan just nodded and agreed and tried not to think too hard about the fact that he was planning a wedding to a woman he barely knew. But in between all the chaos, there were small moments that felt almost real. There was the morning he found Vivian in the kitchen at 6 a.m., still in her pajamas, making pancakes for Lily with the kind of focused concentration she usually reserved for business deals. The pancakes were terrible, burnt on the outside, raw in the middle, but Lily ate them anyway, and Vivian had looked so pleased with herself that Ethan hadn't had the heart to suggest they order from the cook instead. There was the afternoon Vivian canceled a board meeting to take Lily shopping for a flower girl dress, and came back 3 hours later with not just a dress but also new shoes, a stuffed unicorn the size of a small pony, and a story about how Lily had charmed every shop assistant they'd encountered. There was the evening Ethan found Vivian sitting in Lily's room, reading bedtime stories in different voices for each character, and Lily was laughing so hard she had tears streaming down her face. She's really good with her, Mrs. Chen said one afternoon when she stopped by to drop off some of Lily's old toys. They were sitting in the estate's garden while Lily played nearby, chasing butterflies through the manicured flower beds. Yeah, Ethan agreed, watching Vivian crouch down to show Lily something. A caterpillar, maybe, or an interesting leaf. She is. You surprised? A little. I thought she'd be, I don't know, more distant. She's got an empire to run. I figured kids wouldn't be her thing. Mrs. Chen made a thoughtful sound. Maybe she's been waiting for the right reason to let that side of herself show. Some people need permission to be soft. Ethan thought about that long after Mrs. Chen had left. about masks and protection and what people were afraid to lose. The night before the wedding, Vivian's mother hosted a rehearsal dinner that was more lavish than most people's actual weddings. It was held in a private room at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, with more courses than Ethan could count, and wine that probably cost more per bottle than his monthly rent used to be. Ethan sat at the head table between Vivian and her mother, watching family members he was still learning to recognize make toasts about love and commitment and building a future together. Every word felt like sandpaper against his conscience. Marcus stood, raising his glass. To my sister, who's always known exactly what she wanted and never been afraid to go after it, and to Ethan, who's either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest, probably both. The room laughed. May your marriage be filled with the same fire and determination that brought you together. Here, here, the guests chorused, raising their glasses. Ethan drank because it was expected, but the wine tasted like ash. After dinner, Vivian found him on the restaurant's terrace, where he'd escaped for air. The city sprawled below them, all lights and movement, millions of people living their real lives while he stood here in a borrowed tuxedo preparing to make promises he had no intention of keeping. Having second thoughts? Vivian asked, joining him at the railing. 15th thoughts, actually. Maybe 20th. She laughed softly. That's fair. For a while, they stood in silence, watching the traffic flow below. Then she said, I spoke to my lawyers today about the trust fund for Lily. Ethan tensed. What about it? I increased it to $500,000, and I backdated the documentation so even if something happens, if this all falls apart tomorrow, the money is still hers, untouchable, no matter what. He turned to look at her. Why would you do that? Because she deserves security, and because... Vivian hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Because some things shouldn't be conditional. If I've learned anything over the past few weeks, it's that... Vivian, I know what you're going to say. That it's too much, that you don't want charity, that this wasn't part of the deal. She met his eyes. But here's the thing, Ethan. I stopped thinking of this as a deal about a week ago, maybe less. I'm not sure when it happened, but somewhere between you defending me to my uncle and making terrible jokes at breakfast and letting Lily paint your nails while we watched movies last Sunday, it stopped being a transaction and started being something else. Ethan's heart was pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying that tomorrow, when we stand up in front of everyone and make promises, I want you to know that my part won't be a lie. Maybe it started that way. Maybe the reasons I chose you were strategic and calculated, and all the things Charles accused me of. But that's not why I'm marrying you anymore. Then why? Vivian reached up, cupping his face with one hand. Her palm was warm against his skin. Because when I look at you, I see everything I've been missing in this world. Honesty. Kindness. Someone who sees me as more than a bank account or a strategic alliance. Someone who makes me want to be softer, better, real. She smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful expression he'd ever seen. I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I know that's not fair, not when I brought you into this under false pretenses. But I needed you to know, before we do this, before it's too late to back out. Ethan couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything he'd convinced himself about this arrangement, that it was temporary, that it was just business, that his heart was safely locked away, came crashing down around him. Because the truth was, he'd been lying to himself too. I should go, Vivian said, dropping her hand. It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride the night before the wedding, or something like that. I'll see you tomorrow. She started to walk away, but Ethan caught her hand, pulling her back. For a moment, they just stood there, his hand wrapped around her wrist, her eyes wide with surprise. It's not too late, he said quietly. Is it? To back out? Do you want to? He should have said yes. Should have taken the exit she was offering, the chance to walk away before this got any more complicated. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was no. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Good, Vivian breathed. Neither do I. Then she kissed him. It wasn't their first kiss. They'd done that for the cameras at the gallery opening, a chaste press of lips that had meant nothing. But this was different. This was her hand sliding into his hair, his arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her closer. This was mouths opening, breaths mingling, the entire world narrowing down to the taste of wine on her lips and the way she made a small sound in the back of her throat when he deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "So," Vivian said, her voice shaky. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Ethan agreed. She smiled, pressed one more quick kiss to his lips, and left him standing on the terrace with his heart racing and his entire understanding of this situation turned completely upside down. He stayed there long after she'd gone, staring out at the city lights, trying to figure out when exactly he'd stopped pretending and started falling. The morning of the wedding arrived with unseasonable warmth and a sky so blue it looked painted. Ethan woke in the guest suite with sunlight streaming through windows he'd forgotten to close, his head still spinning from the kiss on the terrace and the confession that had preceded it. He lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself that he hadn't just made the biggest mistake of his life. Or maybe, whispered a voice in the back of his mind, the biggest leap of faith. There was a knock at the door. Marcus entered without waiting for permission, already dressed in his tuxedo, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing one to Ethan. "You look like hell." "Thanks. That's exactly what every groom wants to hear." Marcus settled into the armchair by the window, studying Ethan with an expression that was harder to read than his sister's. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. No performance, no polite deflection, just the truth." Ethan sat up, taking a sip of coffee that burned all the way down. "Okay. Do you love her?" The question hit like a physical blow. Ethan opened his mouth then closed it, because he didn't know how to answer. Did he love Vivian? Could you love someone you'd known for less than a month? Someone you'd agreed to marry for money, for survival, for reasons that had nothing to do with the terrifying feelings now tangled up in his chest? "I don't know," he said finally. "I care about her. More than I expected to. More than I should, probably. But you don't love her." "I didn't say that." Ethan set down the coffee, running his hands through his hair. "I said I don't know. How do you tell the difference between real feelings and just getting caught up in the situation? Between actually falling for someone and convincing yourself you have because it makes this whole thing easier?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Can I tell you something about my sister? Something most people don't know?" "I'm listening." "Vivian hasn't dated seriously in 5 years, not since—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Not since she got burned pretty badly by someone she thought she could trust. Someone who wanted her money more than he wanted her. After that, she threw herself into work, into building the company, into proving she could do it all alone. She stopped letting people in, stopped trusting that anyone could want her for the right reasons." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. So this whole arrangement was her way of controlling the narrative. If she was going to be forced into a marriage for appearance's sake, at least she could choose someone who was honest about what they wanted from her. Someone who wouldn't pretend it was love when it was really just access to her bank account. Marcus leaned forward. "But then you showed up and ruined her careful plan by actually being a decent human being, by caring about your daughter more than the money, by defending her to our uncle when you had nothing to gain from it. But I still don't see what this has to do with, she's falling for you, Ethan. Maybe she's already fallen. I saw it last night at dinner in the way she looked at you when she thought no one was watching, in the way she lit up when Lily called her name. My sister doesn't do anything halfway, and when she commits to something, or someone, she commits completely." Marcus stood, straightening his jacket. "So I'm asking you again, do you love her? Because if you don't, if you can't, you need to walk away now, before you break something in her that might not heal." Ethan wanted to argue that it was too late to walk away, that they'd signed contracts and made promises and set events in motion that couldn't be undone. But he knew that wasn't what Marcus was really asking. "What if I hurt her anyway?" Ethan said quietly. "What if I'm not enough for this world she lives in? What if 6 months from now she realizes she made a mistake and I'm the one left?" He stopped, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. Marcus smiled, but it was a sad smile. "That's love, brother. The fear that you're not enough. The terror that they'll wake up and see through you. Welcome to the club." He walked to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're exactly what she needs. Someone who sees her as a person, not a prize. Someone who makes her laugh at breakfast and doesn't give a damn about impressing the board. Just don't waste it, okay? People like her don't come around twice." Then he was gone, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and a cup of coffee going cold in his hands. 2 hours later, Ethan stood at the altar in the estate's garden, which had been transformed into something out of a dream. White flowers everywhere, gauzy fabric draped between trees, rows of chairs filled with people he mostly didn't know. The late morning sun filtered through the leaves overhead, casting everything in golden shadow. He couldn't breathe. The string quartet began to play, and everyone stood. Ethan's hands were shaking. He gripped them behind his back, forcing himself to look calm, even as his heart tried to punch through his ribs. Then he saw her. Vivian appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm, and the world stopped. She wore white silk that flowed like water, simple and elegant, with her dark hair swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. No veil, no elaborate train. Just her, looking at him with eyes that held equal parts hope and terror, and Ethan forgot every doubt that had been eating at him since dawn. She was beautiful. She was terrifying. She was walking toward him, and he couldn't look away. Lily went first, scattering rose petals with the kind of serious concentration she brought to coloring books and puzzles. When she reached the altar, she gave Ethan a gap-toothed grin and whispered, "You look fancy, Daddy." "So do you, baby." Then Vivian was there, standing beside him, her father stepping back with a nod that seemed to carry some silent message Ethan couldn't decipher. The officiant began speaking, but Ethan barely heard the words. He was too focused on Vivian's face, on the way her hands trembled slightly when he took them in his, on the way she was looking at him like he was the only person in the entire garden. "The couple has chosen to write their own vows," the officiant said, and Ethan's stomach dropped because he'd completely forgotten about that part. But Vivian squeezed his hands, a silent reassurance, and went first. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "3 weeks ago, you were a stranger, someone I'd chosen on paper, for reasons that seemed practical and safe. But standing here now, I realize that nothing about this has been safe. From the moment you walked into my office, you challenged everything I thought I knew about myself and what I wanted from life. You showed me that strength doesn't come from control or money or power. It comes from love. From choosing to show up every day for the people who matter, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She paused, and a tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if what we're building will last beyond the timeline we set. But I do know this. I want to try. I want to be the person you see when you look at me. I want to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me. And I promise, for as long as you'll have me, to protect your heart the way you've protected mine." Ethan's throat was so tight he could barely force words out. He hadn't prepared vows, hadn't thought past the performance, the show, the contract that had started all of this. But looking at Vivian now, he realized Marcus had been right. This wasn't about the money anymore. Maybe it never had been. "Vivian," he said, his voice rough, "I came into this thinking I was making a sacrifice, trading my freedom for my family's survival. I expected to hate every minute of it, to count down the days until I could walk away." He saw her flinch slightly, and he tightened his grip on her hands. "But you didn't let me hate it. You made it impossible. You took care of my daughter like she was your own. You challenged me to be better, to see beyond my own narrow view of what this life could be. You made me believe in second chances." He paused, then decided to hell with it. If he was doing this, he was doing it honestly. "I don't know if this is love. I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore after losing Sarah. But I know that when I'm with you, I feel like maybe I could be. Maybe I could let myself believe in something more than just survival. So I promise you this. I won't waste what you're offering. I won't take it for granted. And I will spend every day of the next 6 months, or however long this lasts, trying to be the man you think I am." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Even Eleanor Ashford was dabbing at her face with a handkerchief, and Marcus was grinning like he'd just won a bet. The officiant cleared his throat. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Ethan pulled Vivian close, and when their lips met, the garden erupted in applause. But he barely heard it. He was too focused on the way she melted into him, on the way her hands came up to frame his face, on the way this kiss felt nothing like performance and everything like promise. When they finally broke apart, breathless and smiling, Vivian whispered, "No going back now." "Wouldn't want to," Ethan whispered back. The reception was held in the estate's ballroom, which had been transformed into something out of a Hollywood film. Crystal chandeliers, white and gold everywhere, tables set with china so delicate Ethan was afraid to touch it. A live band played in one corner, and a dance floor gleamed in the center of it all. Ethan and Vivian stood at the entrance greeting guests as they filed in, and for a few hours, it almost felt normal. People congratulated them, told them how beautiful the ceremony had been, made jokes about married life that Ethan smiled and nodded through, even though half of them went over his head. But underneath the champagne and celebration, Ethan could feel something building, a tension in the air that he couldn't quite name, like the pressure before a storm. He noticed it first in the way certain guests kept glancing at each other, whispering behind hands. Then in how Uncle Charles kept watching them with an expression that was too calculating to be simple observation. And finally, in the way a man he'd never seen before kept trying to catch Vivian's eye from across the room. The man was in his late 30s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, making small talk, but his attention kept drifting back to Vivian. "Who's that?" Ethan asked quietly during a break in the receiving line. Vivian followed his gaze and went very still. "No one important. Doesn't look like no one. It's complicated." Before Ethan could press further, Eleanor appeared at Vivian's elbow. "Darling, there are some people from the board who want to congratulate you both. Come." They were swept into another round of introductions and pleasantries, and Ethan lost track of the mysterious stranger in the crowd. But the uneasy feeling persisted, growing stronger as the afternoon wore into evening. Finally, it was time for the first dance. The band struck up something slow and romantic, and Ethan led Vivian onto the floor, acutely aware of every eye on them. "Relax," Vivian murmured as he placed his hand on her waist. "You're doing fine. I don't know how to dance like this. Not to this kind of music. Just follow my lead, and try not to step on my dress." He managed a smile, pulling her closer. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked beneath his chin, and as they began to move, Ethan found himself relaxing despite the audience. This was easier than he'd expected. More natural. "Thank you," Vivian said softly, "for what you said during the vows. You didn't have to. I meant it. Every word." She pulled back slightly to look at him, and the expression on her face was so vulnerable it made his chest ache. Even the part about second chances? Especially that part. The song swelled and they turned together, and for a moment it was just the two of them. No contracts, no performance, no ulterior motives. Just a man and a woman dancing at their wedding, trying to figure out how to build something real from the ruins of a lie. Then the music ended, and the spell broke. Other couples joined them on the floor, and Ethan was separated from Vivian by well-wishers and family members demanding their own dances. He ended up partnered with Eleanor, who proved to be an excellent dancer and an even better interrogator. "You surprised me today," she said as they moved across the floor, "with your vows. I wasn't expecting such honesty. Would you have preferred I lied? I would have preferred you to stick to the script we discussed." But there was no real reproach in her voice. "My daughter is not an easy woman to love, Ethan. She's brilliant and driven and absolutely terrified of being hurt. If you meant what you said about protecting her heart, you're going to have your work cut out for you." "I'm getting that impression." Eleanor smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. "Good. She needs someone who won't run at the first sign of difficulty. Someone who sees the woman beneath the armor." The music shifted, and she released him with a pat on the shoulder. "Welcome to the family. Truly." Ethan was passed from Eleanor to one of Vivian's aunts, then to a cousin whose name he'd already forgotten, and by the time he finally escaped the dance floor, his feet hurt, and his head was spinning from trying to keep track of who was who. He found refuge near the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey and watching the party swirl around him. Lily was with a group of other children, all dressed up and running circles around their exasperated parents. Vivian was trapped in conversation with board members, her public smile firmly in place, even though he could see the exhaustion around her eyes. "Quite the spectacle, isn't it?" Ethan turned to find the mysterious stranger from earlier standing beside him. Up close, the man was even more polished, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sorry, have we met?" Ethan asked. "Not formally. I'm James Whitmore, old friend of Vivian's." He extended his hand, and Ethan shook it out of reflex. "Congratulations on the marriage. I have to say, when I heard the news, I was surprised." "Why's that?" "Because Vivian swore off marriage years ago. After we broke up, actually. Said she'd never let herself be that vulnerable again." James took a sip of his own drink, watching Vivian across the room. "I'm curious what changed her mind. Must be something special about you." Everything in Ethan's body went on alert. This was the X. The one Marcus had mentioned, the one who'd burned her badly enough to make her stop trusting. I suppose you'd have to ask her that, Ethan said carefully. Oh, I intend to. We've barely had a chance to catch up since I returned to the city. James's smile widened. It's funny, isn't it? How life brings people back together when you least expect it. I've been abroad for years, building my portfolio, making connections. And now here I am, back home, and Vivian's married to a construction worker. No offense, of course. None taken. Ethan set down his glass before he did something stupid with it. If you'll excuse me, I'm on the board now, you know. Your wife's board. Isn't that interesting? I sit in meetings with her uncle, vote on company policies, have a say in who leads the family empire. James's expression was pleasant, conversational, but his eyes were cold. I wonder if she knew I'd be there when she rushed into this marriage. I wonder if that's part of why she did it, to prove she'd moved on. I think you should leave. Ethan's voice was flat, dangerous. I'm just making conversation at a wedding. Nothing wrong with that. James finished his drink and set the glass down with deliberate care. But here's something to think about, Ethan. May I call you Ethan? You seem like a decent guy. Hardworking, honest, probably really believes he's in love with her. But ask yourself this. Why you? Why would one of the wealthiest women in the country choose a broke widower with a kid and a mountain of debt? What could you possibly offer that she couldn't get from someone in her own world? The words landed like punches, each one hitting a fear Ethan had been trying to ignore. Unless, James continued, his smile turning sharp, she wasn't looking for love at all, unless she needed someone desperate enough to play along with whatever game she's running. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Someone who'd be grateful enough for the money not to dig too deep into her motivations. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? James stepped closer, lowering his voice. I know Vivian better than anyone in this room. I know how she thinks, how she operates, what she's willing to sacrifice to get what she wants. And I'm telling you, friend to friend, you're being used. Maybe she's convinced herself it's something more. Maybe she even believes her own performance. But at the end of the day, this is about the board vote next month. About proving she's stable enough to lead. About image and control and everything she values more than actual human connection. Ethan wanted to hit him, wanted to wipe that smug expression off his face and throw him out of the reception personally. But a crowd was starting to gather, people sensing drama the way sharks sense blood. I think, said a cool voice behind him, that you've overstayed your welcome, James. Vivian appeared at Ethan's side, and the temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. Her face was composed, but her eyes were blazing. Vivian, James said smoothly. I was just congratulating your husband. Lovely ceremony. Cut the act. I heard what you just said. She stepped between them, and Ethan saw her hands were shaking. You have 60 seconds to leave before I have security escort you out. I'm on the board, darling. You can't just throw me out. Watch me. Vivian turned to one of the security guards stationed near the entrance. Mr. Whitmore is leaving. Please see him out, and he's not to be admitted to any family events going forward. James's mask slipped, showing something ugly underneath. You're making a mistake. Again. The only mistake I ever made was wasting 3 years on you. Vivian's voice was deadly calm. Now get out of my house before I have you arrested for trespassing. For a moment, James looked like he might argue. Then Uncle Charles appeared, flanked by 2 other board members, and James seemed to realize he was outnumbered. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, Vivian replied. It is. Security escorted him out. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, people returning to their champagne and conversation with the kind of studied casualness that meant they'd absolutely be gossiping about this for weeks. Vivian stood frozen, her composure cracking at the edges. Ethan could see her fighting to hold it together, to not let anyone see how much that confrontation had cost her. Come on, he said quietly, taking her hand. Let's get some air. He led her out of the ballroom, through a side door into one of the estate's smaller gardens. The moment they were alone, Vivian's legs seemed to give out. She sank onto a stone bench, her hands covering her face. I'm sorry, she said, her voice muffled. I'm so sorry. I didn't know he'd be here. I didn't know he was back in the city, on the board. If I had known... Hey. Ethan knelt in front of her, gently pulling her hands away from her face. It's okay. It's not okay. He just publicly humiliated you at our wedding. He implied that this whole thing is... She stopped, fresh tears spilling over. And the worst part is he's right. About why I chose you, about the board vote and the image and all of it. That's how this started, Ethan. That's the truth he knows, and you deserve to hear. Ethan's chest felt tight. Vivian, no, let me finish, because he's going to spread this. He's going to tell everyone on the board, everyone in our circles, that this marriage is a strategic move. That I picked you because you were desperate and controllable and wouldn't interfere with my plans. And they'll believe him because part of it is true. Only part of it? She looked at him with eyes full of devastation. The beginning. The reason I first approached Richard, first suggested this arrangement. I needed to stabilize my image before the succession vote. I needed to look like someone who could balance power with family, who wasn't just the cold corporate machine they all think I am. And you were perfect on paper. A widower, a father, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Someone who wouldn't expect real emotions or messy complications. Each word was a knife, but Ethan made himself listen, made himself hear the truth he'd known was coming since the moment he'd signed that contract. But then, Vivian continued, her voice breaking, you showed up in my office looking terrified and brave and so determined to save your family, and I knew I was in trouble. Every time we talked, every moment we spent together, you became more real, more impossible to see as just a business arrangement. And Lily, she laughed wetly. That little girl walked into my life and made me want things I'd convinced myself I didn't need. A family, a home, someone to come back to at the end of the day who actually cared whether I was happy or just successful. Ethan stayed silent, his throat too tight to speak. So yes, Vivian said, James is right about how this started, about my original motivations, but he's wrong about what it became. He's wrong about what you mean to me. She reached out, cupping his face with trembling hands. I love you, Ethan. I didn't plan to. I tried not to. But somewhere between the gallery opening and breakfast pancakes and dancing at our wedding, I fell completely, terrifyingly in love with you. And now I've ruined everything by not being honest from the start, by letting you believe this was simpler than it was. The garden was silent except for the distant sound of music from the ballroom and Vivian's ragged breathing. Ethan stayed kneeling in front of her, processing, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions in his chest. She loved him. She'd used him. Both things were true. Say something, Vivian whispered. Please, yell at me. Tell me I'm exactly what James said I was. Tell me you want out of this marriage before it's even begun. Just say something. Ethan stood slowly. He looked at his wife, because she was his wife now, for better or worse, contract or not, and saw everything he'd been afraid to acknowledge. The woman who'd defended him to her family, who'd made terrible pancakes for his daughter, who'd increased Lily's trust fund with no strings attached because she wanted to protect her regardless of what happened between them, who'd kissed him on a terrace like he was the answer to every question she'd been afraid to ask. How long have you known, he asked, that you loved me? I'm not sure. Maybe since you told off my uncle. Maybe before that. Definitely by the time you carried Lily back from Mrs. Chen's and I watched you tuck her in like she was the most precious thing in the world. Vivian's voice was small, defeated. Does it matter? Yeah, it matters. Why? Because, Ethan said, pulling her to her feet, I need to know if I'm the only idiot who fell for someone he was supposed to be pretending with, or if we're both idiots together. Hope flickered in her eyes. Ethan, I'm furious with you, he said honestly, for not telling me everything from the beginning, for letting me walk into this blind, for manipulating the situation even if your intentions eventually changed. He saw her flinch, but he didn't stop. But I'm also furious with myself, because some part of me knew. Some part of me understood that this was too good to be true, that there had to be angles I wasn't seeing, and I went ahead anyway because I was desperate and scared and convinced myself I could keep my heart out of it. I'm sorry, Vivian breathed. I'm so sorry. I know, and I believe you. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her even though his mind was still reeling. I don't know what happens now. I don't know how we fix this, or if we can, or if James is going to destroy both of us with whatever he tells the board. But I meant what I said in my vows. I'm all in. For as long as you want me, for as long as this lasts, I'm yours. Complicated motivations and all. She looked up at him with wonder and disbelief. You're not leaving? Where would I go? My apartment's been rented out. All my stuff is at your house. I'm legally married to you in front of 200 witnesses. He managed a smile that felt almost real. Besides, Lily would kill me if I messed this up. She's already planning which room to turn into an art studio. Vivian laughed through her tears, clutching him like he might disappear. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But I don't deserve you either, so I guess we're even. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Come on. We have a reception to get back to, and I'm pretty sure people are going to have questions about why the bride and groom disappeared right after the dramatic confrontation. Let them talk. I don't care anymore. Yeah, you do, because you're Vivian Ashford, and you care about everything. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. But maybe we can care together, figure out how to handle the fallout as a team instead of you carrying it all alone. She looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. A team. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? Even the fake ones that turned real. They walked back toward the ballroom together, and Ethan tried not to think about what James would do with the information he had. Tried not to worry about the board vote, or the whispers that would follow them, or the fact that their entire foundation had been built on carefully constructed deception. But when they stepped back into the reception, and Lily came running over, wrapping her arms around both of them and declaring loudly that they'd missed the cake cutting, Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Maybe this had started as a lie. Maybe the reasons were complicated and messy, and not at all what he'd signed up for. But standing there with his daughter and his wife, surrounded by music and light and the wreckage of secrets finally spoken aloud, Ethan thought maybe the truth was simpler than any of them had realized. Love didn't care about contracts or motivations or carefully planned strategies. It just was. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. The reception continued without them noticing the cracks. Guests danced and drank and celebrated a marriage that felt both more real and more fragile than it had hours before. Ethan went through the motions, cutting cake, making toasts, posing for photos, but his mind kept circling back to James Whitmore's words and the look on Vivian's face when she'd finally told him the truth. By the time the last guest departed and they were finally alone, exhaustion had settled into Ethan's bones like lead. Vivian had gone quiet too, her earlier vulnerability replaced by a careful blankness that made him think of armor being rebuilt, brick by brick. They walked upstairs together in silence. At the door to their suite, they both paused. I can sleep in the guest room, Vivian offered, if you need space. Ethan thought about it, about putting physical distance between them to match the emotional canyon that had opened up during that conversation in the garden. But then he remembered her hand shaking as she'd confessed everything, the way she'd looked at him like she expected him to walk away, and he couldn't do it. No, he said. Stay. Something flickered in her eyes, relief maybe, or surprise. Are you sure? I'm not sure about anything right now, but I know I don't want to sleep alone on our wedding night, fake marriage or not. He pushed open the door. Come on. The room had been prepared by the staff, candles lit, rose petals scattered across the bed in a display of romance that would have been laughable if it weren't so painfully ironic. Ethan started blowing out candles while Vivian stood in the doorway, still in her wedding dress, looking lost. I can't reach the zipper, she said quietly. He crossed to her and she turned, presenting her back. His fingers found the delicate zipper and he drew it down slowly, revealing the elegant line of her spine. She shivered despite the warmth of the room. Thank you, she whispered. She disappeared into the bathroom and Ethan changed into the pajamas someone had laid out for him. Silk, expensive, nothing like the worn t-shirts he usually slept in. When Vivian emerged, she'd removed her makeup and let her hair down. She looked younger this way, more vulnerable, and Ethan felt his anger soften despite himself. They climbed into bed from opposite sides, maintaining a careful distance in the massive mattress. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Ethan? Vivian's voice was small in the darkness. Yeah? I really am sorry. For all of it. Not just getting caught, but for the deception in the first place. You deserved better than being someone's strategic move. He rolled onto his side to face her. Can I ask you something? Anything. That first day in your office when you looked at me, what did you actually see? Before you convinced yourself this was a good idea, before the plans and the contracts, what was your first real thought about me? Vivian was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then she said, I saw someone carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders and refusing to put it down. Someone who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks but had still shown up because giving up wasn't in his vocabulary. And I thought, she paused, her voice catching. I thought that kind of strength was rare, that kind of loyalty. I thought that if I could have someone like that in my corner, even temporarily, even for the wrong reasons, maybe I could remember what it felt like to not be alone. The honesty in her words hit him like a physical thing. You felt alone? You have a family, a company, more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes, and none of it matters when you go home to an empty house and realize you've spent so many years building walls that no one can get through them anymore. Not even you. She turned toward him, and in the dim light, he could see tears tracking down her cheeks. After James, after what he did, I convinced myself that being alone was safer, that if I never let anyone close enough to hurt me, I'd be fine. I threw myself into work, into proving I could do everything myself, and I told myself it was enough. But then you walked in, and within 5 minutes, I knew I was lying to myself. Because looking at you made me ache for something I'd given up on, something real. Ethan reached out, wiping away her tears with his thumb. What did James do to you? He stole from me. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Not money. He had his own, but secrets, company information. He was working for a competitor the entire time we were together, feeding them intelligence about our moves, our acquisitions, our strategies. When I found out, when I confronted him, he laughed, said I was naive for mixing business with pleasure, that I should have known better than to trust pillow talk. Her voice broke. The worst part was that everyone knew. The board, my family, half of our social circle. They all knew he was using me, and they let it happen because they wanted to see if I was strong enough to handle it, if I was tough enough to lead. Jesus, Vivian, I nearly lost everything. The company, my position, my family's respect. I had to spend 2 years rebuilding what he'd destroyed, proving I wasn't the liability he'd made me look like. And I swore I'd never let anyone have that kind of power over me again. She met his eyes. Until you. Until I looked at you and thought maybe, just maybe, the risk might be worth it. Ethan pulled her closer, and she came willingly, burying her face against his chest. He held her while she cried, stroking her hair, feeling the tremors that ran through her body. He was wrong, Ethan said quietly, about you being naive, about you mixing business with pleasure. The only thing you did wrong was trust someone who didn't deserve it. But I did it again, didn't I? With you. I used you for my own agenda, dressed it up as a business arrangement, and convinced myself it was different because we both knew the score. It was different because you told me the truth, eventually, before it was too late. Is it not too late? She pulled back enough to look at him. Because I'll understand if you can't get past this. If knowing how it started ruins what it became. Ethan thought about his mother, healthy now, back home with care he could never have provided. He thought about Lily, sleeping down the hall in a room fit for a princess, with a future secured by a trust fund that would survive whatever happened to this marriage. He thought about the past 3 weeks, the moments that had felt real even when he'd been trying to convince himself they weren't. Here's what I know, he said slowly. You manipulated the situation to get what you needed, but you also gave me everything you promised and more. You've been nothing but kind to my daughter. You stood up for me to your family. You increased Lily's trust fund with no strings attached because you wanted her protected. Those aren't the actions of someone who sees me as a pawn. They're the actions of someone who fell in love when she wasn't supposed to. Then we're both guilty of that. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'm not saying this doesn't change things. I'm not saying I'm not angry about the deception, but I'm also saying that people make mistakes. People hurt each other even when they're trying not to. And if we walk away every time someone screws up, we end up alone. Vivian's arms tightened around him. I don't want to be alone anymore. Neither do I. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in a bed covered in rose petals neither of them had asked for, in a marriage that was equal parts truth and fiction, holding on to each other like they could anchor themselves against whatever storm was coming, because the storm was coming. Ethan knew it as surely as he knew his own name. It arrived 3 days later in the form of an emergency board meeting. Ethan was at the construction site when Vivian called, supervising a pour that couldn't be delayed. He'd gone back to work the day after the wedding, needing the familiar rhythm of physical labor to clear his head. Vivian had tried to convince him he didn't need to work anymore, that the stipend she was paying him was more than enough, but Ethan had insisted. He needed to be more than Mr. Ashford, needed to maintain some piece of his identity that existed outside of her world. There's a problem, Vivian said without preamble when he answered. James called an emergency board meeting. He's making a motion to delay the succession vote. Ethan's stomach dropped. On what grounds? On the grounds that my recent marriage demonstrates impulsive decision-making and poor judgment. He's arguing that I rushed into a relationship with someone I barely know, someone with no experience in our world, and that this proves I'm not ready to lead the company. Her voice was tight with controlled fury. He's painting you as a gold digger and me as a desperate woman making emotional decisions instead of strategic ones. Can he do that? He can try. Whether he'll succeed depends on how many board members he's already poisoned against us. There was rustling in the background, papers being shuffled. I need you to come home, now. We need to prepare for this. Vivian, I don't know anything about board politics. I'll just make things worse. You won't, because you're going to tell them the truth. She paused. Our truth. Not the sanitized version my family wants to hear, but the real story. About your mother, about the arrangement, about how this started and where it went. Everything. Ethan's hands tightened on his phone. That'll ruin you. If they know this was a business transaction, they're going to know anyway. James will make sure of it. Our only chance is to control the narrative, to show them that yes, this started as an arrangement, but it became something real. That my choice to marry you was both strategic and genuine. That I'm capable of making decisions that serve both the company and myself. And if they don't believe you, then I lose the vote. James or Uncle Charles gets the position instead. And this company my family has built for 3 generations goes to someone who'll strip it for parts and sell it to the highest bidder within 5 years. Her voice softened. But I'd rather lose honestly than win with more lies. I'm done hiding, Ethan. I'm done pretending to be the perfect corporate machine they all think they want. If I'm going to lead this company, I'm doing it as myself. All of me. Including the parts that fell in love with a construction foreman who doesn't care about my money. Ethan looked around the site, the steel frames rising into the sky, his crew working in practice synchronization, the concrete mixer rumbling its familiar song. This was his world. Solid, straightforward, built on sweat and skill instead of manipulation and appearances. But Vivian needed him. And despite everything, despite the complications and the deceptions and the fact that they'd known each other less than a month, he couldn't walk away from her. I'll be there in an hour, he said. The boardroom was exactly as intimidating as Ethan had imagined. A massive table made of dark wood that probably cost more than his old apartment, leather chairs that looked like thrones, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that made him feel like they were floating above the rest of humanity. 12 board members were already seated when Ethan and Vivian entered. He recognized some of them from the wedding. Uncle Charles, a few older men in expensive suits, a woman whose name he couldn't remember. And at the far end of the table, looking supremely confident, sat James Whitmore. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Charles said, standing. I know we have a regular meeting scheduled for next week, but Mr. Whitmore has raised concerns that require immediate attention. Concerns about my marriage, Vivian said flatly, taking her seat at the table. Ethan sat beside her, acutely aware that he didn't belong here. Let's not pretend this is about anything else. James smiled. Your marriage is simply the most recent example of a troubling pattern, Vivian. Impulsive decisions, emotional reactions, a tendency to prioritize personal desires over corporate responsibilities. Marrying someone I love is now a corporate irresponsibility? Marrying someone you barely know, someone with no background in our industry, someone who stands to gain significantly from the relationship. Yes, I'd call that irresponsible. James opened a folder in front of him. I've done some research into Mr. Cole. Impressive, really, how quickly his financial situation improved after meeting you. Medical bills paid in full. A trust fund established for his daughter. A monthly stipend that's more than most people make in a year. One might almost think this was a transaction rather than a love story. One might also mind their own damn business, Ethan said before he could stop himself. The room went silent. Every eye turned to him. Charles raised an eyebrow. Mr. Cole, I appreciate your loyalty to my niece, but this is a board matter. It's a board matter about my marriage, Ethan interrupted. So yeah, I think I get a say. He looked directly at James. You want to paint me as a gold digger? Fine. Let's talk about money. Vivian offered me a deal when my mother was dying and I was drowning in debt. She offered to pay the medical bills, secure my daughter's future, and give me enough money to breathe for the first time in 3 years. Now, so in exchange, I had to marry her and play the devoted husband for 6 months. No feelings, no complications, just a business arrangement that benefited both of us. He heard Vivian inhale sharply beside him, but he didn't stop. So yes, I took the deal, because I was desperate and scared and I'd have done anything to save my family. Does that make me a gold digger? Maybe. Does it make this marriage invalid? Probably. Does it prove that Vivian makes impulsive emotional decisions? He shook his head. No, because this wasn't impulsive. It was calculated and strategic and exactly the kind of smart business move you all claim to value. Ethan, Vivian started, but he cut her off. I'm not finished. He stood, facing the entire board. Here's what you need to know. Vivian entered into this arrangement with clear eyes and specific goals. She needed to appear stable and committed before the succession vote. She needed to prove she could balance power with family. She picked me because I was desperate enough to say yes, and respectable enough not to embarrass her. It was cold, it was calculated, and it was brilliant. James was smiling now, clearly thinking Ethan was doing his work for him, but Ethan wasn't done. But here's the part you're missing, he continued. The part that actually matters. Somewhere between the contract and the wedding, between the performance and the reality, something changed. I fell in love with her. Not with her money or her position or what she could do for me. With her. With the woman who makes terrible pancakes for my daughter, who works 18-hour days and still finds time to ask how my mother's recovery is going, who's terrified of being vulnerable but does it anyway because she knows it's the only way to build something real. He turned to Vivian, who was staring at him with tears streaming down her face. You want to know if this marriage proves she makes emotional decisions? Ethan said to the board without looking away from his wife. Yeah, it does, because falling in love when you're not supposed to, when it complicates everything and puts everything at risk, that's emotional. But it's also brave and honest, and exactly the kind of leadership this company needs. Someone who can be strategic without being heartless. Someone who can make the hard calls but still remember there are human beings affected by those choices. The boardroom was absolutely silent. So here's my question for all of you, Ethan said, finally turning back to face them. Do you want a leader who's so terrified of making a mistake that she never takes a risk? Or do you want someone who's willing to bet on people, to see potential where others see liability, to build something that matters instead of just something that makes money? He sat down. His hands were shaking, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Vivian's hand found his under the table, squeezing so hard it almost hurt. Charles was the first to speak. That was quite the speech, Mr. Cole. It was the truth. Perhaps? Charles looked at Vivian. Is what he said accurate? The arrangement, the contract, all of it? Vivian lifted her chin. Yes, every word. I offered Ethan a business arrangement because I needed to stabilize my image before the vote. I chose him because he had something most people in our world don't, something real to lose, something that would make him honor the agreement. And the feelings? The woman whose name Ethan couldn't remember asked gently. Are those part of the arrangement too? No. Vivian's voice was clear, certain. The feelings were never part of the plan. They were a complication I didn't expect and couldn't control. But they're real. And they've made me better at my job, at relating to people, at understanding what actually matters in life. If that makes me unfit to lead this company, then I don't want to lead it. James leaned forward. This is exactly what I'm talking about. She's willing to throw away 3 generations of family legacy over a man she's known for less than a month. That's not leadership, that's delusion. Is it? Marcus spoke up from his position near the windows. Because from where I'm sitting, she's done something none of us have had the courage to do. She's admitted she's human, that she makes mistakes and takes risks, and sometimes bets on the wrong horse. But she's also willing to stand by those choices, to own them, to let them make her better, instead of more afraid. He looked at James. Unlike some people who'd rather tear others down than build anything worthwhile themselves. I'm trying to protect this company, James started. You're trying to protect your own wounded ego. Eleanor Ashford's voice cut through the room like ice. She'd been silent until now, sitting at the far end of the table, but when she stood, everyone paid attention. Let's be honest about what this is really about, James. You're not concerned about Vivian's leadership abilities. You're angry that she moved on, that she found someone who values her for more than her bank account and her connections. And you're using this board position to punish her for it. That's not... It absolutely is. Eleanor walked to stand behind Vivian's chair, placing her hands on her daughter's shoulders. I raised my daughter to be strong and strategic and never show weakness. I taught her that emotions were liabilities and that personal connections were tools to be leveraged, and in doing so, I nearly destroyed her ability to have any kind of real relationship. She looked around the table. So yes, she made an unconventional choice. Yes, she started this marriage as a strategic move, but she also had the courage to let it become something more, to choose love even when it complicated her perfectly ordered plans. And that, gentlemen, is exactly the kind of adaptability and emotional intelligence this company needs in its next leader. The board members looked at each other, silent conversations happening in glances and subtle gestures. Finally, Charles stood. I move that we table the succession vote delay and proceed as originally scheduled next week. All those in favor? 9 hands went up. James's stayed down, along with 2 others who'd clearly been swayed by his arguments. Motion passes, Charles said. This meeting is adjourned. The board members began filing out, some stopping to shake Vivian's hand, others avoiding eye contact entirely. James left without a word, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. When they were finally alone, Vivian turned to Ethan and buried her face in his chest, her shoulders shaking with sobs that were equal parts relief and disbelief. "You didn't have to do that," she said against his shirt. "You didn't have to lay everything bare like that. You could have just let me handle it. We're a team, remember? You don't get to carry everything alone anymore." She pulled back to look at him, mascara smudged, eyes red, and Ethan thought she'd never looked more beautiful. "I love you," she said. "I know I said it before, but I need you to hear it again. I love you. Not because of the arrangement or the contract or any strategic reason. I love you because you stood up in front of people who terrify you and told them the truth. Because you see me, really see me, and you love me anyway." "I love you too," Ethan said, and saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff. Terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely right. "I don't know how we make this work long term. I don't know if I'll ever fit into your world or if we can build something that survives outside of crisis and drama, but I want to try. If you'll have me." "If I'll have you?" Vivian laughed through her tears. "Ethan, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, complication and all." They kissed there in the empty boardroom, surrounded by the trappings of power and money that had brought them together and nearly torn them apart. And for the first time since this whole thing began, Ethan felt like they might actually have a chance. Not because the problems were solved, not because James had backed down or the board had fully accepted their relationship or the future was suddenly clear, but because they'd stopped hiding from the board, from each other, from the complicated truth of what they'd built together. And that, Ethan was learning, was what love actually was. Not the fairy tale version with easy answers and happy endings tied up in bows, but the messy, complicated, terrifying version where you chose each other anyway. Where you stood up in front of people who could destroy you and said, "This is who I am, these are my mistakes, and I'm not running anymore." Later that night, after they'd gone home and tucked Lily into bed, and finally had a moment to breathe, Vivian pulled out the original contract they'd signed. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. "Ending this." She found a lighter in a drawer, and before Ethan could stop her, she set the corner of the contract on fire. They watched it burn in the fireplace, pages curling and blackening, all those carefully worded clauses and conditions turning to ash. "There," Vivian said with satisfaction. "No more 6-month timeline, no more exit strategy, no more pretending this is temporary. So what is this now?" She turned to him, and her smile was the most genuine thing he'd ever seen. "This is a marriage, a real one, with all the mess and complications and uncertainty that comes with it, if you still want it." Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her perfume and smoke and new beginnings. "I want it. I want you, for as long as you'll have me." "How does forever sound?" "Terrifying," he admitted, "and perfect." They stood there watching the last of the contract burn away, and Ethan thought about how far they'd come from that first meeting in Vivian's office. How much had changed in just a handful of weeks. How a deal meant to save his daughter had ended up saving him too. Not from poverty or debt or desperation, but from the prison of believing he didn't deserve more than survival. That love was something that happened to other people, in other lives, in stories that had nothing to do with single fathers drowning in bills. Vivian had shown him differently, had crashed into his life with her contracts and her money and her carefully constructed walls, and somehow they'd both ended up free. The fire died down to embers, and with it, the last traces of the lie that had brought them together. What remained was something far more valuable than any contract could have guaranteed: the truth, and the choice to build a future on it, one honest, terrifying, beautiful day at a time. The week before the succession vote felt like living in the eye of a hurricane. Outside the estate walls, the press had gotten hold of pieces of the story. Not the full truth that Ethan and Vivian had laid bare in the boardroom, but enough fragments to build speculation into a feeding frenzy. Headlines screamed about whirlwind romances and unlikely matches, about billionaire heiresses and their mysterious blue-collar husbands. Photographers camped outside the gates, hoping for a glimpse of the couple at the center of the storm. Inside, Vivian worked around the clock, preparing presentations and strategies, meeting with board members individually to shore up support. Ethan watched her transform back into the corporate warrior she'd been before he'd met her, all sharp edges and controlled intensity, and he wondered if burning the contract had changed anything at all. "You're doing it again," he said one night, finding her in her home office at 2 a.m, surrounded by financial reports and projections. She looked up, surprised. "Doing what?" "Carrying everything alone. Shutting me out." Vivian's expression softened with guilt. "I'm not shutting you out. I'm just trying to make sure we don't lose everything we fought for." "We're not going to lose anything." Ethan crossed the room, gently closing the laptop in front of her. "But you're going to burn out if you keep this up. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I don't remember." "When's the last time you had an actual conversation with Lily?" That one landed. Vivian's face crumpled slightly. "She asked me to read to her last night, and I said I was too busy. I saw the look on her face, Ethan, like I was just another adult who'd promised to be there and then disappeared." "So stop disappearing." He pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. "The vote is in 5 days. Whatever preparation you're going to do, it's already done. The board members have made up their minds. All you're doing now is torturing yourself. What if they vote against me? What if everything we did, the honesty, the vulnerability, laying our relationship bare, what if it wasn't enough?" "Then it wasn't enough, and we'll figure out what comes next together." He tilted her chin up, making her look at him. "But I need you to hear this, Vivian. Your worth isn't tied to that vote. Whether you lead the company or not, whether the board chooses you or not, you're still the woman I fell in love with. You're still the person who turned my daughter's life around and showed me what it means to be brave. That doesn't change." Tears spilled over, and she didn't try to hide them. "I'm scared." "I know. Not just of losing the vote, of losing myself in this, of becoming so focused on winning that I forget what we're actually building here." She pressed her face against his chest. "My whole life I've measured success by external validation, by board votes and profit margins and proving I'm better than whatever expectations people set for me. But with you, with Lily, success looks different. It looks like pancakes on Saturday morning and bedtime stories and someone who knows all my flaws and stays anyway." "Then maybe that's what you should focus on." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "Come to bed. The reports will still be here tomorrow." She let him lead her upstairs, and for the first time in days, she slept through the night. The morning of the vote, Ethan woke to find Vivian already up, standing by the window in the dawn light. She was wearing one of his old t-shirts, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too many thoughts." She didn't turn around. "Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if we'd never met? If Richard had never made that call?" "All the time." "Would it be better?" Ethan got out of bed, crossing to stand behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "It would be simpler, quieter, a lot more predictable. I'd still be in that crappy apartment, working double shifts, drowning in debt, and telling myself it was enough because at least Lily was safe." "That sounds terrible." It was, but it was familiar, safe in its own way. No risk of getting my heart broken by a billionaire who makes terrible pancakes. She laughed wetly. "They're not that bad. They're actually worse than you think." He kissed her temple. "But I wouldn't trade them, or you, or any of this chaos we've created. Even if the vote goes against you today, even if everything falls apart, I don't regret a single moment." Vivian turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes that held the weight of everything they'd been through. "Promise me something. Anything. If I lose today, if the board chooses someone else, promise me we'll still be okay, that this marriage, this life we're building, isn't contingent on me winning." "Vivian, You could lose every vote, every board seat, every dollar you have, and I'd still be here because I didn't fall in love with the CEO or the heiress or the woman who can command a boardroom. I fell in love with the person who reads fairy tales in funny voices and who cried watching a kid's movie last week and who burns everything she tries to cook but keeps trying anyway. I love you so much it terrifies me. Good, Ethan said, pulling her closer. Because if I'm the only one terrified, that doesn't seem fair. They stood there as the sun rose over the city, holding each other against whatever the day would bring, and Ethan thought about how much had changed since that desperate phone call from Richard. How a transaction meant to save his mother had transformed into something that saved them both. Vivian left for the office at 8, dressed in a power suit that could cut glass, her armor firmly in place. Ethan stayed home with Lily, helping her with her homework and trying not to watch the clock. The vote was scheduled for 10. By 11, they'd know. At 10:47, his phone rang. Vivian's name flashed on the screen. His heart stopped. Hello? I won. Her voice was shaking, disbelieving. Ethan, I won. 9 votes to 3. They chose me. Relief flooded through him so powerfully he had to sit down. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. It's because of you. What you said in that boardroom, the way you stood up for me, Charles told me that's what changed his mind. That seeing someone believe in me that completely made him reconsider his own doubts. She laughed, giddy with victory and relief. I have to stay for press conferences and meetings, but I'll be home by dinner. Tell Lily we're celebrating. I'll tell her. And Vivian? Yeah? I love you, CEO Ashford. I love you too, Mr. Ashford. She hung up, and Ethan sat there grinning like an idiot until Lily came running in to ask why he looked so happy. That night, they celebrated with takeout pizza in the estate's formal dining room, much to the staff's horror. Lily wanted to know what they were celebrating, and Vivian explained in terms a 6-year-old could understand that she'd gotten a really important job, one that would help a lot of people, and that she couldn't have done it without their support. Does this mean you won't have time for bedtime stories anymore? Lily asked, her face worried. Vivian's expression shifted, understanding the deeper question beneath the surface. It means I'll have to work harder to make time for what matters. But bedtime stories, art projects, Saturday morning pancakes, those aren't negotiable. Those are the most important meetings on my calendar. Lily brightened. Really? Really. In fact, I was thinking, how would you feel about me adopting you? Officially making you my daughter, not just on paper, but for real. The room went silent. Ethan's throat closed with emotion. They'd never discussed this, never even hinted at it, and hearing Vivian offer it now. Would I call you Mom? Lily asked quietly. Only if you want to. You can call me Vivian or V or whatever feels right to you, but either way, I'd like to be your family. Legally, officially, permanently. If that's okay with you and your dad. Lily looked at Ethan, seeking permission or reassurance or something he couldn't quite name. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Okay, Lily said, and then with more confidence, yes, I'd like that. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. She pulled Lily into a hug, and Ethan watched his daughter, their daughter, wrap her small arms around the woman who'd come into their lives as a stranger and had become so much more. Later, after Lily was asleep, Ethan found Vivian in their bedroom, staring at the adoption papers she'd apparently had drawn up weeks ago, just waiting for the right moment. You've been planning this, he said, hoping for it. There's a difference. She looked up at him. I know we said no more secrets, so I need to tell you. I started the process 3 weeks ago, right after the wedding. I told myself it was just in case, just to have the option available. But the truth is, I wanted it. Wanted to be her mother in every way that matters. I just wasn't sure if I had the right to ask. Vivian, you've been her mother since the day you filled her room with toys and learned how to braid hair from YouTube videos. The paperwork just makes it official. She smiled, wiping at her eyes. I never thought I wanted this. A family, a child, the whole domestic dream. I convinced myself my career was enough, that I didn't need anything else. But then you two crashed into my life and showed me everything I'd been missing. We didn't crash. You orchestrated it with surgical precision. Maybe at first, but what came after? That was all real. All us. She set down the papers, crossing to him. I have a proposal for you. Another contract? Nothing like that. I'm done with contracts. She took his hands. I want to renew our vows. Not in front of cameras or family or anyone who matters to the business. Just us, Lily, and whoever we want there. I want to marry you again, Ethan. But this time, for all the right reasons. With no secrets, no strategy, no ulterior motives, just love. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, the last piece of armor he'd been carrying finally falling away. When? Whenever you want. Tomorrow? Next month? Next year? I don't care about the timeline. I just care about making promises to you that aren't tainted by how this started. What about the vows we already made, the ones at the wedding? Those were real, but they were also made under the shadow of everything we hadn't said yet, everything we were still hiding from each other. Vivian's voice was steady, certain. I want to stand in front of you and promise forever when there's nothing left unsaid between us, when we both know exactly what we're choosing and why. Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her perfume that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. Okay, but I have one condition. Name it. We do it at the park, where I used to take Lily every Sunday, the one with the old oak tree and the pond. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Just us and the people we actually care about. That sounds perfect. They planned it for the following month, giving themselves time to settle into their new reality. Vivian threw herself into her role as CEO with the same intensity she brought to everything, but true to her word, she carved out time for what mattered. She learned to delegate, to trust her team, to understand that being a good leader meant knowing when to step back as much as when to step forward. Ethan watched her transform, not into someone different, but into a more complete version of herself. The corporate warrior who could command a boardroom and the woman who helped Lily with art projects were the same person. She'd just finally learned to let both sides coexist. The adoption went through faster than expected, pushed along by lawyers who worked for Vivian and knew better than to delay when she wanted something. On a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, they stood in a judge's chambers while Lily was officially, legally, made a part of their family. Congratulations, the judge said, smiling warmly. You're now a forever family. Lily beamed, showing off the gap where she'd lost another tooth. Does this mean I get to have two last names? Lily Cole Ashford? If you want, Vivian said. Or we could hyphenate all of ours. The Cole Ashford family. Ethan liked the sound of that. A merging of their worlds, their identities, everything they'd built together. The week before the vow renewal, Marcus pulled Ethan aside at a family dinner. I wanted to thank you, Marcus said. For what? For giving my sister back to us. The real her, not the robot she'd turned herself into. He glanced across the room where Vivian was laughing at something Lily had said, her entire face lit up with joy. I haven't seen her this happy in years, maybe ever. She did that herself. I just gave her a reason to try. You gave her more than that. You gave her permission to be human, to make mistakes and be vulnerable and want things that have nothing to do with business. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. You're good for her, for all of us actually. You keep us honest. The day of the vow renewal arrived with crisp autumn air and leaves turning gold. They gathered in the park just as the sun was beginning to set, casting everything in amber light. There were no cameras, no press, no performance, just family, real family. Marcus and Eleanor, a few close friends, Mrs. Chen, who'd watched Lily grow up, and Ethan's mother, healthy and radiant, holding her granddaughter's hand. Vivian wore a simple white dress, nothing like the elaborate gown from their first wedding. Her hair was loose, her feet bare in the grass, and she looked more beautiful than Ethan had ever seen her. They'd asked Marcus to officiate, and he stood before them with a grin that suggested he was enjoying this far too much. We're gathered here, he began, to witness Ethan and Vivian recommit to a marriage that started as the worst business deal in history and somehow became the best love story I've ever seen. Vivian laughed, tears already starting. Ethan squeezed her hands. They've asked to speak their own vows, Marcus continued. Ethan, you're up. Ethan took a breath, looking at the woman who'd changed everything. Vivian, the first time I saw you, I thought you were going to ruin my life. And in a way, you did. You ruined my ability to settle for less than extraordinary. You ruined my capacity to protect my heart by never letting anyone in. You ruined every excuse I'd made for why I didn't deserve more than just survival. He smiled through his own tears. You crashed into my life with your contracts and your impossible offer, and you made me brave enough to want more, to believe I could have more. Not just money or security, but love. Real, messy, complicated, beautiful love. So today, I promise you again, but this time with no contracts, no exit strategies, no safety nets. I promise to love you when you're brilliant and when you're burning pancakes, when you're conquering boardrooms and when you're crying over kids' movies. I promise to be your partner, your equal, your safe place to land when the world gets too heavy. And I promise that no matter what comes, success or failure, joy or sorrow, we face it together, always. Vivian was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. She took a shaky breath and began her own vows. Ethan, I spent most of my life convinced that love was a weakness, something that made you vulnerable, something that people could use against you. I built walls so high that I forgot what it felt like to be truly seen by another person. And then you walked into my office looking terrified and determined, and within 5 minutes you'd already started demolishing those walls whether you knew it or not. She laughed through her tears. You saw through every mask I wore. You called me out when I was hiding, challenged me when I was wrong, and loved me anyway when I was being impossible. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing we can do. That letting someone in, really in, is how we become whole instead of just successful. So I promise you today, with no agenda and no strategy, that I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of the trust you've placed in me. I will protect your heart the way you've protected mine. I will love Lily as my own daughter and build a home where all of us can be exactly who we are. And I will choose you every single day for as long as I live. Not because a contract says I should, but because my heart knows I already have. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. Even Marcus had to wipe at his face before continuing. By the power vested in me by absolutely no one, because this isn't legally binding, he said with a grin, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Again, for real this time. You may kiss, well, you know the drill. Ethan pulled Vivian close and kissed her as the sun set behind them, as their family cheered as Lily made gleeful sounds of disgust the way 6-year-olds do. And when they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Ethan felt something he'd never quite believed in before. Peace. Complete, absolute peace, with exactly where he was and who he'd become. They celebrated with a picnic dinner on blankets spread across the grass, with wine for the adults and juice boxes for Lily, with laughter and stories, and the kind of easy conversation that only comes when pretense has been completely stripped away. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, Lily curled up between them, fighting sleep. Tell me the story again, she mumbled, about how you and Daddy met. Vivian and Ethan exchanged a glance, silently deciding how to tell this one. They'd promised honesty, but 6-year-olds didn't need to know about contracts and desperation. Once upon a time, Vivian began, there was a very lonely woman who had forgotten how to be happy. She had everything she thought she wanted, a big house, an important job, more money than she could count. But she went to sleep every night in an empty home and woke up every morning wondering if this was all there was. That's sad, Lily whispered. It was. But then one day she met a man who was also lonely, but for different reasons. He was lonely because he loved too much, his daughter, his mother, his family. He worked so hard taking care of everyone else that he'd forgotten to take care of himself. And when they met, something magical happened. What? Lily's eyes were heavy but interested. They saw each other, Ethan continued, really saw each other, past the money and the fear and all the walls they'd built. And they realized that maybe, just maybe, they could help each other. The woman could help the man remember that it's okay to ask for help. And the man could help the woman remember that having money doesn't mean you have to be alone. And then they fell in love, Lily said, like she was finishing a familiar story. And then they fell in love, Vivian agreed, even though they weren't supposed to, even though it made everything more complicated. They fell in love anyway because sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't plan for. Like me? Lily asked. Especially like you, Vivian said, pressing a kiss to her hair. You're the best complication we ever could have asked for. Lily smiled, finally giving in to sleep. They carried her to the car, tucked her into her seat, and drove home through quiet streets while she dreamed in the back seat. At the estate, though Ethan had stopped thinking of it as Vivian's and started thinking of it as theirs, they put Lily to bed together, a routine they'd perfected over the past months. Then they retreated to their own room, to the bed they now shared without hesitation, and lay in the darkness talking about nothing and everything. Do you ever regret it? Vivian asked quietly. Taking the deal? Walking into that office when you could have found another way? Every day, Ethan said honestly. And also never. It's complicated. How so? I regret that my mother had to get sick for this to happen. I regret that I was so desperate I couldn't see any other option. I regret that we started with lies instead of truth. He rolled to face her, finding her hand in the darkness. But I don't regret you. I don't regret us. I don't regret any of the moments that brought us here, even the painful ones, because they made us who we are. They taught us what we're capable of surviving. We survived a lot. We did. James trying to destroy you, the board vote, the press, your family's scrutiny, my own doubts, each other's fears. He pulled her closer. And we're still here, still choosing each other, still building something that started as the worst idea either of us ever had. Vivian laughed softly. When you put it that way, it sounds insane. It is insane, but it's also perfect, in its own messy, complicated way. They fell asleep tangled together, and Ethan dreamed of the future for the first time in years. Not the survival-focused future where he was just trying to make it through another day, but the kind of future that included plans and hopes and dreams. Family vacations and Lily's graduation, and growing old with someone who knew all his scars and loved him because of them, not despite them. In the months that followed, they settled into a life that looked nothing like what Ethan had imagined, but everything he'd needed. Vivian ran the company with a combination of ruthless efficiency and unexpected compassion, becoming known as the CEO, who actually cared about her employees as people rather than assets. She instituted policies about work-life balance, about parental leave, about mental health support, and when the board questioned whether she was being too soft, she showed them the increased productivity and decreased turnover rates and dared them to argue with results. Ethan continued working construction, though he eventually started his own company with an investment from Vivian that he insisted on paying back with interest. He hired people like he'd been, hardworking, desperate for a chance, drowning in circumstances beyond their control, and gave them the kind of stability he'd once dreamed of. It felt good, building things with his hands while building futures with his business. Lily thrived. She